Welcome. I'm Claire Shaeffer. I write sewing books and collect vintage fashions. This video focuses on the construction used on a 19th century ball gown. Worth and Manouche is an online exhibition on the website of the Museum of the City of New York. I have many favorites in this exhibition. Today I shall focus on this exquisite design from 1860. Don't worry, I'll include the exhibition link at the end of the video so you don't have to record it now. This stunning ball gown was worn to a grand ball on October 12, 1860. The Prince of Wales Ball was given by the citizens of New York. This exclusive event celebrated the first visit of a member of the British royal family to come to the United States. The gown was fashioned in silver gauze. The fabric is a compound weave with a silk warp and silver in the weft. According to tradition, the same material was woven in Lyon for Alexandra Fyodorova, the Dowager Empress of Russia, and an additional piece was obtained by the Gardner family. Similar to other dresses of the period, the fabric was woven en disposition, specifically to be made up in this dress style. Each section has the same velvet motif in a floral design. However, the width of the motif designs is different for each section. On the bodice frills, the motifs are 1 3/4 inches wide. On the upper skirt, they are 18 3/4 inches, and on the lower skirt, 13.5 inches. The dress has a separate bodice and skirt. The fitted waist-length bodice has a deep point at center front. The off-the-shoulder neckline has a shallow V at the center. Both skirts extend to the waist, where they are pleated into 6 large box pleats. Each skirt has 4 straight panels, 27.5 inches wide. The skirts measure 110 inches at the hems. There is no economy of fabric on this dress. At first glance, the velvet appears to be 2 shades of coral. It actually is only 1 shade. The loops of velvet were cut by hand to create the darker flowers. The lighter flowers were left uncut. On this detail, you can see the cut and uncut loops of the velvet. Even in this photograph, you can appreciate the beauty of the velvet. The frills at the neck edge and on the sleeves were shirred by hand. The lower edge of the bodice was finished with 2 rows of piping. The neck edge was finished with a single row of piping, and the frills were finished with lace. In this detail, you can see the double piping on the outside and the way it was finished on the wrong side. Look carefully and you can see the lino weave on the silk gauze. The skirts were finished with plain hems, and although the skirt is very light, it has a lot of volume. The skirt has a narrow Petersham waistband and fastens with a hook and eye. The waist measures only 24 inches. In this detail, you can see the compound weave of the silver gauze, the silk understructure, and the raveled silver threads. The fabric is very fragile, and this unraveling probably occurred when the dress was worn. The bodice has 2 rows of frills at the neckline and on each sleeve. A single row of short running stitches was used to shear the frills and sew them to the bodice. The same thread was used to sew each frill to the bodice and for the shearing. When the frills are held back, you can see the piping inserted between the bodice and the sleeve. Long running stitches were used to sew the lace to the edges. The bodice laces at center back with a ribbon tie at the neck edge to prevent gapping. The eyelets are overcast with silk thread. The bodice was first backed with gray plain weave silk, which was applied to the wrong side of the silk gauze. Then the two layers were handled as one. This backing is sometimes called an underlining or mounting. Based on the cotton waiststay, this is a very early Worth Bobergh design. It was probably made before Worth was appointed dressmaker to the Empress Eugenie, or shortly after, but before the new waiststays, which were stamped with the royal crest, had arrived. There is a seam at center front and seams on each side of the center from the point over the bust to the neck edge. There are seams at the underarm and on the bodice back from the waist to the arm side. The front and underarm seams are pressed open and overcast by hand. The seams on the back are pressed toward the sides and overcast together. The seam structure on the front and back bodice is interesting and an early forerunner of princess seaming. This detail shows the seam on the back bodice. The seam appears to be sewn with back stitches, but it could be just 2 rows of running stitches. The edges of the seam were overcast to prevent fraying. On the far right, you can see the end of the casing for the boning. On the left, the long running stitches attach the backing to the silver gauze. The bodice is very lightly boned. The center front boning begins at the point and stops about 2 inches from the neck edge. The boning on each side of the center begins at the point and ends just below the bust. All 3 bones extend to the point at the waist. There is a short boning on the back seam at the waist. There is also a casing for boning on the underarm seams, but there is no boning. The casings for the bonings were sewn in place with short running stitches. The sleeves were sewn in by hand with back stitches. After the seam was trimmed, the edges were overcast neatly by hand. Notice the tuck on the neck edge. Tucks like this were sometimes added after the edges were finished to tighten the edge so it would fit more snugly. The facing for the back eyelets and the casings for the boning are a plain weave cotton material instead of the silk facings and casings you see on Worth's later garments. The double piping is a signature Worth finish. Each piping is made by covering a small cord with silk. Then the piping is sewn close to the cord with running stitches to hold the silk wrinkle-free and the cord in place. To finish the edge, the garment's hem allowance was folded, trimmed, and sewn to the underside. Next, the first piping was sewn to the edge with running stitches. Then the second piping was sewn to the edge. The second piping has a wider seam allowance which covers the hem and first piping. Lastly, the raw edges of the second piping were turned under and sewn flat. I've tilted this photo so you can see how you would hold the edge when sewing if you are right-handed. You can also see the cording where the silk is worn. The pipings are finished differently at the points. It looks like they didn't have enough double piping to finish the point on the right back and covered the end with a small patch. Here you can see the wrong sides of the back bodice. The finish on the right back is much nicer than the finish on the left back. They could have been sewn by 2 different workers, or the person finishing the left back simply might have gotten better as she went along. I've added a photo of the dress from 1986. At that time, gowns were accessorized when they were displayed. I don't think this dress really needs any accessories. It's beautiful without them. Before we say goodbye, let's take one more look at this stunning gown. Here's the link for the Worth Bobergh online exhibition at the Museum of the City of New York. I'm Claire Shaeffer. Thank you for joining me today. If you've enjoyed this video, join my channel to examine more designs and learn a few construction techniques.